Hello and welcome to the webinar on optimizing the user's cognitive load. My name is Kalyan Banerjee. I am a senior product manager with Amazon. You have my LinkedIn contact over here in case you want to get in touch with me. So today we're going to discuss something about a critical user experience where as a part of the product design, you expect the user to provide certain inputs. So these inputs that a user is expected to provide for your product requires them to use certain amount of judgment. And that judgment leads to some sort of cognitive load with those particular users. And this today's webinar, we're going to discuss how relevant they are, how we can reduce them, and what are the different ramifications of reducing those loads. So we'll start first with what does cognitive load mean in this context, right? So whenever you're expecting somebody to make a decision, they go through a process of either deduction or using past information to make a judgment call. So we'll start with a simple example. A user is visiting an e-commerce website to buy any product, right? And the user enters a string in a search box and gets some results. The user looks at those results and finds that the two options that have been surfaced, both of them the user has an experience with. This person goes into the product details, tries to understand certain aspects of it, and also tries to understand what are the customer feedback, right? If in this scenario, the user has the right kind of information or is able to deduce the right kind of information, in those scenarios, they're able to make a decision. But essentially, ultimately, they have to have some sort of cognitive load on their mind before they make any decisions of this kind, right? So this is what I'm speaking about in terms of the cognitive load that you expect the user to have when they're interacting with your product. So these decisions, if you think about it, keep piling up one on top of the other as a user goes through a journey through his or her day using myriad of products that they interact with, right? It can be multiple mobile applications they use for various functions like navigation, for search, for watching videos. It can be the other decisions they take in a personal day-to-day life, like what to eat, what to watch on the TV, and so on. But these decisions, they leave an impression, they leave an exhaustion on the minds of the user. And we sometimes, at product manager, need to take a step back and think from the user's perspective, like how many decisions do we make in a particular day, and how many of them we wish we did not have to make, right? And some cases, the decisions that we made, did they really change anything? Like, were we comfortable somebody else or a system making those decisions on our behalf? That is what we should start with when we think about a decision that we are expecting a user to make as a part of a product. Right? So I'll take an example here. Think about an online meeting scheduler, right? You're going to schedule a meeting as a part of your work, or even personally, you have multiple very busy participants that you require to attend. You have access to their calendar, you look through their free slots, and then you decide on one. And when you want to set up the meeting, you provide the context of the meeting, the subject, and the location, and so on. And after that, you're expected to put a conference bridge, right? Or book a room for that meeting, whatever it is. And at that point in time, there are certain questions that the scheduler asks, like, should you go for a randomly generated pin, or you should go for your personal pin, and so on. Right? After you go through that process, then you're able to set up the meeting. Now, think about it, right? Like if you were given a free hand, or you had to decide that particular product, then would you design in a way where all these information is surfaced readily to you based on certain preferences that you make, and all you have to do is to just send that invite out with the context in place, right? personally, from my perspective, a lot of these decisions that you had to make and look through weeks and weeks of calendar for multiple participants, decide on exactly what the free slot is sometimes very daunting. It can be a significant portion of your professional life, especially for product managers who have to have multiple meetings with their stakeholders, whether it's the tech team, whether it's the senior leadership, and so on, right? And when we think about the decisions we are making, we need to be very precise about how much value those decisions are adding to the work that we do. Right? Essentially, can the system do that on our behalf? Now, just switching gears a little bit, right? Like it's very easy for us to think about, okay, probably these decisions are something that we can spare with and let the system take care of these decisions. But at the end of the day, every user wants control over the experience, right? But there is a limitation to that. At some point, it becomes too much to control. So when you start designing a product and start thinking from a user's perspective, here are a few questions that you might want to ask yourself so that you design the right kind of product, right? What is the benefit of providing a particular control to a user for making a decision, right? And by control, what I mean here is a particular aspect or particular decision that you're allowing the user to make instead of the system doing it on their behalf. So we start with the first question, where we understand what the benefit is of providing a particular control. And then, can we make this decision on the behalf of the user? Do we have the right kind of data? Can we capture some of the data up front, right? Can the user pre-decide, use some default settings or add some preferences where they're able to tell the system that, hey, this is how I want it to behave upfront, so that unless told otherwise, the user does not have to provide the same inputs over and over again. In some cases, like for example, if you're having an application which is a location-based application, you do not need the user to always decide on which location they're searching a particular service for, right? You should try to capture that information without having the user to explicitly put it, obviously with the user's consent, so that you don't encroach into the data privacy aspects of it. And lastly, when we think about that as a particular decision that we need the user to make, we need to assist the user in a meaningful way. And the meaningful is a very key word over here, right? So think about a video streaming app. And this has a lot of movies or even TV shows that you can choose for, right? And to assist the choice, the app does not just give you a search box to search whatever TV shows you want to, it also gives you a list of recommended videos. Now, these recommended videos, are they really assisting you to choose the right video that you are looking for, right? What are the parameters they're recommending these videos for? Are they just recommending because they want to show the stuff to you, or they know that this is the kind of videos that you would like to see? That is the difference in assisting somebody in a meaningful way. If you show the user the same recommended videos time and time again, at some point in time, the user will be frustrated and they will not know what to search for. They will not find those recommended videos very usable, or they don't want to watch them. They probably migrate to a different platform. So essentially what I'm getting at is that even if you are reducing the cognitive load on a particular user, please ensure that you are helping them in a more meaningful way, and then not just showing some sort of information which just adds to the frustration for the user. So going back to the example we just spoke about, the online scheduler. In that particular case, right, if every time you set up a meeting, we need to make a decision whether the pin is going to be a random one or your personal one, can that be moved to a default setting? right? If we know that a set of attendees or participants in that meeting are required, can the scheduler automatically show up some free slots very quickly, navigate to those free slots very quickly? Uh, and the meaningful way of assisting the user here will be to also account for the working hours for these participants, right? You do not want to have a participant show up a time zone where it is way outside of their regular working hours. So for example, if you have to set up a meeting with somebody in New York City and somebody in Beijing, then there is a very little amount of usable hours that will overlap, right? None of the working hours may actually overlap. So in those cases, you need to know what the preference of these participants are, or at least show a reasonable time which can both the parties can make happen. So essentially, where we think a product can add value is to understand how much of these controls that we can provide to a user, the user really wants, right? And if you think that some of these controls they do not really need to have, even if they initially think otherwise, I think we should use our judgment to decide how much we can automate over here. But having said that, right, like automation always comes at a cost. And in some cases, the cost can be the trust of the user. So as we try to reduce the decision making and reduce the controls in that way, we can eventually make the user experience unpredictable, right? If the user does not understand the basis of the automated decision, or they cannot trust your judgment, or see some inconsistency in your product's behavior, uh, the experience will not be great, and they will lose trust, and they will probably prefer a mechanism which will provide them better control. And this is where you start losing your user, or you losing your customer. Now, I'll give you an example to explain where I'm coming from. So think about a navigation application, right? Where if you put the origin and the destination, it automatically gives you the best route for you to move from point A to point B. Now, once you do that, the obviously the system at the back end looks at the traffic patterns, the distance, the speed limits, and looks at various other parameters to decide like what is the best route. Now, as you use this particular application, there can be certain aspects of this particular application that are more critical than others, right? So for example, let us say this application routes you through a particular road, and expects you to take a left turn where the left turn is actually blocked, right? And in that particular point, you are going to follow the application, and either get into a situation that you cannot take that turn, or just blindly following that application, you might take an incorrect left turn, which might get you into other trouble. Now, either way, if this application hasn't accounted for such critical information, then your faith on that particular application will reduce. And that is what you do not want, right? There are other aspects of the application which might be slightly less critical. So for example, let us say it routes you through a particular road where the speed limit is actually 25 miles per hour, but it shows 30 miles per hour. It calculates the time of arrival based on 30 miles an hour, making some bunch of assumptions. Now, when you get into the road, obviously you look at the speed limit, and you obey the speed limit, and drive at whatever speed that you're expected to. Even if there is a little bit of mismatch in the arrival time, you do not really lose the trust in the application as much, right? You might just leave a feedback on the application with some sort of inputs. Essentially, what I'm saying is that this is a parameter which is far more manageable compared to the previous example of the left turn that I provided. So any product where you are reducing the control, you are optimizing or automating certain decision making, please ensure that not only that you have the consistency or the right kind of information that you provide to the user to explain your automation or explain your optimization, you also identify the key parameters that will be a bigger trust buster and test them more thoroughly, ensure that there is no glitch whatsoever in those automations so that you don't lose the user for good. At the end of the day, when you think about a particular user who has trusted your application, and as they are trusting your application, they're getting acquainted with it, and they are okay to give you the control, it is only because they are seeing that the results from that application is as desired. If the results become unpredictable, if the results are not up to the mark, you will lose your customer, and your user will prefer a, a particular application or particular product with a better set of controls. Moving on, right? So for every product manager, conceptually it's great. I mean, we understand that decisions are exhausting and we do not want the user to make a lot of decisions, but at the end of the day, the biggest dilemma a product manager will have is where to provide control and where to automate. Now, my 2 cents on this is we should let the user decide and not take a judgment call on behalf of the user. So, for example, try engaging with your customer as much as possible. Probably be a user of that product yourself and try to understand firsthand where the problem is, or where you think that a decision can be preempted and where the decision needs to be taken by the user. Even better, to reduce judgment or reduce bias in your judgment, you can experiment with some sort of A/B testing where you have two variations of a particular product with a controlled group and an experimental group, and figure out what is the product or what is the feature that a user likes better than the other. We can take a route of a conjoint analysis with certain amount of features where you have control versus certain amount of features you do not, and try to frame up different decision-making points within those products features. But even if you don't want to go with such heavy lifting and analysis at the stage of product design, you can definitely at least have a very simple set of features enabled for a particular group and also automated from another group, and see how the user is reacting to it. Are they able to trust the product completely? Are the results as desired? And see what the feedback you are getting over there. And that becomes a key aspect of the decision making that you need to make. Lastly, we always have to think about how our vision is to make the user's life better. And in some cases, that vision might be difficult for the user to see. So you will have to use your own judgment. But as you use your own judgment, please ensure that you're basing it on information. If you're basing it on your personal experience or some sort of bias you have, that is a classic pitfall you don't want to get into. Right now, once you have used all these techniques and you've decided on a set of information, a set of decisions that you do not want your user to make, it is very important to understand the underlying cause of a decision that user is making, right? So, for example, if you're thinking about the example we talked about on the online scheduler, if a particular user always wants the required attendees to have a free slot, but the optional attendees may or may not have a free slot. So, and you can see that behavior with a large group of beta testers or initial users, early adopters. When you run the experiments, then that is a decision-making point that you can incorporate automatically into your system, right? And you can understand that why a particular user is taking that decision, and that gives you a basis for automation. Don't rely solely on statistics. Like, for example, X number of users from a group has decided to take a particular route and or particular path forward, do not always assume that that is the right way to do it. It can be very well an error in judgment in that particular sample set that you had for the test users. I'll give you an example. In the navigation application we talked about, let us say every participant that you relied upon, or most of the participants you relied upon to get the initial data, you find that they always wanted to go with the fastest route, right? But there can be a small set of users who would prefer a slower route for various reasons. Their confidence with driving, their vehicle condition, whatever it may be. Now, if you have to design a product, please ensure that just don't design the features that bulk of the users are going to use. Ensure that for a full scale adoption, you need to think about the users that probably are low in number, but for this particular set of users, this particular feature is very important. So allow them that part of the judgment and give them that particular part of the control. Just don't automate it with an assumption that you're serving the majority, right? For various reasons, that majority might change in a different set of users. Lastly, whenever you are taking a decision, please try to make it a two-way door and not a one-way door. So today, if you have decided to automate something, but as you launch the product or you test the product, you see that that particular automation is not helping, you need the user to make a decision which they're not able to make, then always be ready to take a step back and give the control back to your user, right? There is nothing wrong in doing that, nothing wrong in understanding certain pain points of a user after you have launched it. Just be ready to do that, and when you design the product, be ready to make it flexible enough that the control might change at some point in time. So if you think about these points, and if you are able to apply them in your product design, I believe from a user perspective, this will be far more compelling. I'll leave you with one particular thought from Jeff Bezos, where he says that 3 good decisions a day is enough for him, and he just wants to ensure that those decisions are high in quality so that they're impactful. So similarly, when you are asking your user to make a decision, ensure that they're able to make high quality decisions and they're not required to make decisions that are not actually essential for them to make. So with that thought, I would leave you to that and end this webinar over here. Thank you very much for participating and listening through. Happy to interact over LinkedIn if required, and look forward to participating again.